Hi, everybody. Welcome to the HR Roundtable. I'm PJ Trudeau. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited to have Dr. Al here with us. She has just done some amazing work when it comes to dealing with burnout, especially burnout within HR, and has some great statistics and really wonderful information to go through with us. I know this is an area a lot of us, even before COVID, I think HR certainly dealt with this, and it's something that we never take the time to take care of ourselves. I talk a lot about that in the roundtable and how important it is to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, because as much as we need all of the energy to take care of our staff and all that we do and put into taking care of them, we definitely need to make sure we take care of ourselves. So Dr. Alessandra Polizzi is a former HR executive who's now the CEO of Burnout Consulting, a top 20 workplace wellness provider for 2022 that supports mental health in the workplace through resiliency and psychological safety skills development programs. She's also the ISO Global Liaison for Occupational Health and Safety, co-founder of Kite HR Wellbeing app for HR professionals, and shares of the moment discoveries on all of these topics via the Be Verdant podcast. Let me turn it over to you, Dr. Al.
Thanks so much, PJ. I appreciate it. And thanks, everyone. If nothing else, you just took time out for yourself. So let's celebrate that win, shall we? So hard for us in HR. A little bit about me. PJ covered most of it. Former chief people officer who burned out and tried to find a solution, couldn't find anything that was science-based or practical, and so decided to make my own. And that's how I started my company. We now have 60 affiliates around the globe who are certified to train our program, which is based on the World Health Organization's guidelines on mental health at work. But one of my passion areas is my brothers and sisters in HR and helping to support you as a peer in understanding the research and the tactics that have been proven to help support us in the HR profession. So many people, when we talk about burnout, we talk about mental health, they think, oh, it's COVID related, COVID's kind of winding down. That should be behind us. But the fact is that if we just look at within the context of the pandemic, we are also a country, a world in mourning. We've had over 1 million people die here in the US, and research shows that natural disasters like a pandemic often have up to 40% of the people who experience that natural disaster experience post-traumatic stress symptoms for up to 2 years following. Right now, latest research shows about 30% of the US and the UK population are experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress following COVID. And so that is actually expected, if not slightly better than we thought it would be. But the fact is that that's not the only issue or stressor that's been in existence for us over the last few years. Everything from inflation to social unrest, the threat of nuclear war. There are many stressors that exist for us and for our workplaces that impact the mental health and stress level of our employees. Because as much as we want to believe it to be true, we don't have a work brain and a rest of life brain. We have the one brain. And when that brain is stressed, that stress shows up no matter where we are. We aren't able to actually turn off the feelings or the emotions. They just come along for the ride. And so being aware of all of those things and giving ourselves space to understand how that impacts us and our teams is an important part of creating a thriving organization. So recent studies show that only about 3 out of 10 HR professionals feel like they have well-being in their lives. And recent research shows that 98% of HR is experiencing symptoms of burnout. What I like to say is we're like the Ann Richards quote of, we're like Ginger Rogers. We do the same moves as everyone else, but backwards and in heels. In other words, we have to both experience the stressors that everyone else around us is experiencing and take the lead on navigating the organization through that crisis. And these are crises that many of us, I have an SPHR, it wasn't covered in there what to do if Roe versus Wade got overturned, if there's social unrest, if we have threats of nuclear, if we have a pandemic, none of that stuff was covered, right? So I was trying to explore and learn while doing, also feeling all the feelings. So that double whammy for us in HR is something for us to pay attention to. And therefore it makes sense why so many of us feel burned out. However, I did this survey back a couple months ago on LinkedIn to see what are we doing about it, right? We know it to be true. We see all the, the articles, the posts on LinkedIn. I don't know about on your social media, but where I interact with other HR folks, they're feeling the stress. And so I was wondering what people's plans were. And you can see that there was no plan. So it's something that maybe we've learned to accept as part of the job, which I'm here to say we don't have to. I just wanted to share this with you because this just recently came out the last few months from Sage. If you reach out to me, I can send you links to some of these data points and research studies. This one showed, it was talking about the perceptions and the future of HR. And there are some things in here I think are really pertinent for us to pay attention to, not so we feel bad about them, but so that we're aware of these potential biases or influences that may negatively impact us in how we interact with others. And just kind of as a guide, we're going to go through a lot of these. So I kind of call this on the roller coaster. We're going to go into all the things that we need to pay attention to, but then we're going to talk about actions we can take. So this isn't just how much it's can be a burden to be in HR. This is recognizing and acknowledging the challenges that have been documented and categorized and quantified, and then building a plan on what to do about it. Does that sound okay with everybody? Okay, so buckle up. This is the part where we're going to go down on the roller coaster. So this was a study looking at C-suite members of the C-suite and HR teams. And so new expectations of HR, a staggering 69% of HR leaders expect employees' expectations of HR to completely change in the next 3 years. If you agree with that statement, would you pop an exclamation point for me in the chat? So this is expecting the function to change. Okay, if you disagree, go ahead and put a star or an X, star. Okay, next one. More visible and influential across the organization. The stats are coming from research by Sage. Again, if you want a link to it, I can send it to you. Just contact me. My information can be available at the end. 84% of the HR leaders felt the C-suite were previously unclear on the value that HR brought. Anyone, if you agree with that one, give me another exclamation point. We'll just use that as our code. So this is 84% of us believing that leaders weren't really 100% sure of the value of HR prior to the pandemic. I love the extra exclamation points with emphasis. Thank you. Thank you. All right, here come the bummer ones. Same study. Despite expecting HR teams to pick up more strategic work, 57% of the C-suite sees HR as a largely administrative function. And this is a conversation I have I coach CPOs. I work with a lot of CPO teams or HR teams, and the frustration level of I'm trying to do the strategic work, the big work, the culture work, but they keep miring me down in administrative detail. And it's hard to go from administrative to strategic back and forth, back and forth. In fact, research says that bouncing back and forth is actually a stressor, right, for us. And then the other one, remember I said 98% of HR feels burned out, and yet the perception is 3/4 of the C-suite feel that HR's workload isn't unmanageable. I see nodding heads. I want us to like sit with that for a minute. So of course, we're going to feel stress. Of course, we're going to feel pressure. Yes, HR will take care of it. Of course, we're going to have the feelings that we have if we're trying to be strategic, but the majority is expecting us to be administrative. And if there's a belief that what we're doing is fine. And many of us try to convince ourselves that this is fine. This is what we're used to. This is the job. And so my point is, yes, a lot of this is the job. But acknowledging it and understanding the perceptions of others and how those stressors impact us can help us build better self-care plans. So if we are burned out, we have a strategy for getting out of that. And if we're not quite burned out, we have a strategy for avoiding it. All right, so another quick quiz. How many of these are myths? There's 7. So out of these 7, there's 7. Out of the 7, how many of these are myths? Yes, you guys caught on to my little trick. Yes, it's all of them. Burnout is not new. It's been around as a concept for 30 years. It was a surprise for me when I realized I was burnt out and I started researching that it was a real thing with symptoms and like research and all the things. It's not only essential workers. We've talked about how HR can get uniquely positioned to get burnt out. If you chill on the weekend, it's not going to necessarily have a huge impact on your burnout. You may be able to use that to avoid it by coping and recovering, which we'll talk about. But it's not the same thing as being stressed out. Burnout is when that stress has been accelerated to the point where we no longer have the coping mechanisms to recover, and we find ourselves suffering from the symptoms of burnout, which I'll talk about here in a second. And the fact is that we've been talking about burnout in HR for 30 years. This was an article that came out in 1992 about the burnout of HR. And look at the things that they listed as causes: low importance of HR, lack of appreciation, the unique position that we're in, which we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute, poor communication to HR, right? I wish I would have known this was coming. I wish I would have known you were having this problem before it got escalated to this issue, and lack of opportunities for growth. Think about the challenges that can happen when we want to move maybe out of HR, or we want to move into a more, impactful role that can be relatively limited. So let's do a quick check-in on how all of you are doing. We're going to do a burnout assessment. So pull out a piece of paper, your phone, a calculator if you need it, post it. We're going to give you a series of questions on a 5-point scale, and then we'll add them all up and see where you fall. All right, first one, I just feel like quitting. Is this something that you feel like never, or very often, or somewhere in between? I don't take pride in my work. Oh, you don't need to put these in the chat if you don't want yet. I'll have you put the totals in. So just write them down for yourself so you can add them up. But thank you for doing that. So I saw these numbers come up. Okay, so we've done 2 so far. I feel like my workplace is toxic. I don't have as much time to plan as I like. I don't think positively about my job. I don't feel like I have anyone to talk to. I feel unappreciated or undervalued. People or issues easily get on my nerves. I feel low physical or emotional energy. I can be unpleasant with people when they don't deserve it. I seem to be forgetting things or not as sharp as I once was. I don't feel like I'm winning as much as I would like. I'm unclear or confused about what I need to do at work. Okay, add them up. If you feel comfortable, put your total in the chat. And this comes from a survey from Mind Tools. I have a more scientific one. If anyone is interested, I can make that available for your group for free if you'd like. Just reach out to me and I will get you set up on that. That is the MBI assessment. It's this is more like a Cosmo quiz, but one thing to pay attention to is anything that you answered a 5 to, you want to definitely pay attention to those. So we've got a 34, we have a 40, we've got a 35. All right, everybody's in the right place. This is good news. 37, 42. Yeah, so again, these are things that we may not think about as burnout, like being exhausted or being tired. And so I want to talk for a moment about common causes of burnout. This is just for the general population. And then we'll talk about some specific risks for HR. But before we get into this, are there any questions, comments so far? Let's just do a quick check-in. Everyone tracking along? We good?
Al, a quick question. What would a good number have been there? And what would, when you're looking at those numbers, what are the ranges? Okay, sorry, I was busy calculating my numbers at the time.
Yes, so I mean, I think, you know, a lower number is always better. Again, this is, like I said, a Cosmo quiz, so we won't get too into the science of it. If you're concerned, like I said, reach out to me. I have a better one.
Right.
We can use. And it's not about being good or bad. It's just being aware of where you are so you can build a plan. Right.
Thank you for going over that again.
All right. So again, these are more general. And this is based on scientific research over the last 30 years of burnout in the workplace. Okay, across multiple globally and across multiple industries. Right. So having too much time. No, sorry. Scratch that, reverse it. Too much to do, not enough time, right? Workload is a big, what's called a psychosocial hazard or a hazard for accelerating burnout. Now, it doesn't mean that if I have too much work, I will burn out. It's not a guarantee, but it can increase our risk.
And so when I, early in my career, could just work because that was fun for me and I would do it a lot and some probably more than I should. And then I had kids and I hope for everyone, whether you have kids or not, you should have something outside of work that's as important to you and is part of who you are. That's not just work. But the thing for me that helped me learn that was when I had kids. And I have 3 boys. And there were literally, for my oldest, I was a single mom for quite a while. So there were literally like hard stops on what I couldn't do. Like I was the one that had to leave at a certain time. Even if our executive meeting was going long, I had to say, you know, I'm out of here, guys. Sorry, I got to pick up my kid from daycare. You know, enjoy. Let me know how it goes. And those were some really hard things for me to do because I also, kind of your point, Stephen, like feeling a lot of loyalty and ownership and wanting to serve people. It's hard to be the one that like puts something down. But because I had other places that depended on me, I had to. And then I had to learn how to fit in all of those things so that I felt like I could give the parts of me in the best way possible to all of the things that were important to me. And so I think having something like that, whether it's kids or something you do in the community or faith or whatever it is outside of work that is as important to you, that you can also kind of have as a balance to your commitment to the workplace, I think that also helps, gives you some perspective.
So that came from we did a roundtable on burnout and HR earlier this year. And so again, if you're interested in that, I can share the link. Okay, so that was first one. Second one, lack of control over the work or unclear decision making. So when we feel disempowered or lack authority or agency over our work, it can accelerate and increase our risk of burnout. Lack of job security is a big one. So if we feel, for example, that our position is a cost center and not accretive to the bottom line, if we're in a part of the organization that seems to be easily cut. I was in L&D for a very long time, and I left L&D because of this, and now I'm back, right? But that feeling of lack of job security, feeling like you're not critical to the business, that can create stress, which can accelerate burnout. Values misalignment. This one is a big one for us in HR. In many cases, we represent the values and culture of the organization. If there are things happening within the organization that misalign with our values, that can be an accelerant for stress, right? I personally have experienced this where the C-suite and I did not see eye to eye about things like diversity. And so when people were upset, how do I speak to that? I'm supposed to be the representative of the culture. And so, or decisions that are made that you just completely disagree with, even though you've given counsel to do something differently, a riff that you think maybe you didn't need, as an example. That can put stress on us when our values are put in conflict with the things we have to stand for. Lack of support or appreciation. We covered this one earlier. Not feeling like the work you're doing is valued, not getting the appreciation for putting in hard work. That again, it's not about feeling bad for ourselves, but just being aware that that comes with it as a weight to our emotional well-being. And then my favorite, lack of role clarity or alignment on goals. So when we have conflict and multiple people doing the same work, or we're not sure how success is measured, or one group is working toward one outcome, another group is working toward another, role clarity is actually a great way. Creating role clarity is a great way to build psychological health and support the mental health of your organization by having clear roles and clear goals. Not the most touchy-feely thing in the world, but it makes crispness in what we know that what good looks like and how will be measured.
And then there's one of the big things is like lack of role clarity. And I can tell you in HR, I find I've been at small companies, I've been at large, Fortune 100 companies, and the definition of what HR does, where they start and stop, is completely different in everywhere I've worked, and even titles are wildly different. So you can easily find yourself in a role that you were HR generalist for 10 years and you go to a company and you're like, this is not what I know how to do. And this isn't what I expected. And or like you get hired for this job description and then you walk in and you're like, whoa, that's not at all what I'm doing. And that is just the reality. And so lack of role clarity can play, a big part. And Al was talking about this before, but even just, there's gaps in like what your skill set is. And so maybe your skill set is X, Y, and Z, and this role is either evolved to need A, B, and C, or maybe they thought they needed X, Y, Z and they really needed A, B, C. And you're in this role and you're like, I don't have the skills to actually do this.
So that was from Stephanie and I did a session on burnout in HR. I have started a group on LinkedIn called HR Wellbeing. And so we did that for that group. But the reason I wanted to share this with you is remember that data point we shared earlier where the C-suite seeing HR as mostly administrative. And for those of us who aren't really wired in that way, who are more kind of strategic and more kind of big ideas, projects, that kind of thing, that can create burnout because we aren't leveraging our strengths. And for me personally, that's exactly what happened. I was hired to be the esprit de corps person, and then I was forced to manage payroll, which I'm not judging anyone who's good at that. I admire people who are good at that. I am not. And so I just found myself trying to be good at something that I'm just not wired to be good at. And it was exhausting. So that's one of the ways in which, and that's a common threat. That's not just for HR. So like I said, these are just accelerants of burnout and potential causes of burnout. It's not guaranteed if you have this that you will burn out. We bring our own ability to cope, our own backgrounds, our own experiences, our biases, our past trauma, our, horrible boss we had our first out of college. Like, we bring all that stuff with us at work. And so all those things can mix together and then ultimately lead to burnout, especially if we don't have the coping mechanisms to recover or to manage and set boundaries. And so what does that look like? So there are 3 documented symptoms of burnout. One is that emotional or physical exhaustion. So you probably saw that in the quiz that we did, right? I just don't have the energy to do anything. I just can't get myself motivated. So that's one. The second is cynicism, which is total distrust in other people, a disbelief in the good intentions of others. And, that one is not one that I had expected. And so that was a big surprise for me. And the other one was often in the literature, they call this lowered performance. I'm going to call this, decreased cognition, decreased capability, decreased skills. And that was actually a big one for me. When I was burnt out, I went from being an Excel guru to like not being able to figure out why my spreadsheets wouldn't add up, which again, did I mention the payroll? I did my best. And I just thought, well, maybe this is an age thing, right? So I was trying to figure out like, why am I stupid all of a sudden? And that was a symptom of burnout. Okay, so let's talk about 6 hazards in addition to the ones we just spoke about, hazards for HR. And again, we're going to talk about what to do about it. So it's okay. We're going to just accept and understand the minefield, right? And then we'll build our path for trying to either avoid the mines or put on some protective equipment. Before we pop in here, any comments or questions so far? Okay, great so far. Thank you, Anthony. Okay, so let's talk about 6 hazards. We took a little breath. We can move on. So a lot of these quotes either come from social media groups I belong to on either Reddit or Facebook or TikTok, or the 1992 article. So actually, this is from the 1992 article. So dramatic extremes on a regular basis. I taught a session yesterday for another group on something called toxin handling, which is another thing that happens in HR. And that sometimes we just want to hear good news, right? So that going from these extremes and handling these extremes, that can increase our risk of burnout. So think about this. How often do you go from one extreme to another? And for those of us who book things back to back, it might be from one meeting to another meeting. And so going from those extremes to another, there's tons of research on the emotional roller coaster being more draining and causing us to need better focus on coping mechanisms and recovery from those stressful experiences.
Kind of coaxing them through, and then it started coming out, and it was a room of HR people, a whole room of HR people, 100 of us in a space. And it's like, how do you deal with this stuff? How do you deal with this stuff when you see it happen and you just keep gathering it and holding it in, and then you have to deal with it. So but gathering it in as an HR person is also building on that trauma. For those of us that are in the space very heavily right now, it's really important. Step out of that space. Don't read any more books on Black or Indigenous history that day. Step right out of the space. Turn off the TV. One of the participants said about putting in music that has no words and just kind of I guess it's what Al's doing, being mindful and just kind of peel away that piece. Otherwise, it just pulls you in, right?
And that again was from an earlier roundtable that we did. Ingrid has also been a guest on my podcast, so if you want to check out, we talked about this topic specifically in that article, that research from 1992. Okay, number 2, the increasing complexity within the function. So we saw that in the data from SAGE, right? How many of us believe, and we saw our exclamation points, how many of us believe that the function is going to be changing significantly in the next 3 years? But it's also all the things we need to know and be good at, right? You have to be an attorney, a workers' compensation expert, a psychologist, an equal employment specialist. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so again, because we're having to shift from different ways of working, that creates more emotional drain. So that's something to pay attention to. And we'll talk about some tactics in a bit. You know, I said the last 2 years, I need to make this in the last 3 years. You know, think about how much has changed. What are you working on now that you would have anticipated in 2019? Right? How much has changed? So again, giving ourselves some space to recognize all of that.
I think we've been in a period of extended and tremendous uncertainty. And, you know, I think that the reality is, like, things are not going to change. They're not going to get more clear. We're going to have, you know, a period where we're going to need to continue to lead our organizations through difficult decisions, through change. And, you know, that depending on, you know, our personality, you know, that can be an extremely draining place to be.
Okay, let's go on to our next one, shall we? Number 3, and this is a big one especially for us in HR, is loneliness. Okay, often, I think it's a large percentage. I want to say it's like 36%. 36% of HR professionals are a HR department of one. So there's that. I'm going to ask for in the chat, why would HR be considered a lonely position? Or if you want to come off mute, feel free to join. Oh, Angela has a statement. I don't see you, Angela.
Is my video not showing?
There you are. Oh, you're right in the middle. I don't know how I missed you.
So for me, what I ran into is I started here at the company about 2.5 years ago. We're a really relatively small company. We have about 80 employees. And the person who told me about the job, I know this person, but I'm not really friends with them, but they're part of my family, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And their husband is, not them specifically. And I run into, if I go to lunch with this person, everybody's like, oh, look at her, she's best friends with it. And I'm just like, seriously, we're talking about payroll because she's happens to be my payroll backup. And her, because I don't know if anybody else has this problem. My accounting department is so catty. And if I go to lunch with this particular person, I'm her best friend, so no one will talk to me because they think I'll tell her everything.
Absolutely. I've had that.
And I'm just, at this point, I've limited to how many times I go out to lunch. If we do go out to lunch, it's strictly business, and I shouldn't have to feel that way, but it is. It's completely, I'm completely lonely because there's very few people I can go out with.
If you feel the same way as Angela, go ahead and give her some support. Put a mark in the chat. Pick your own star, exclamation point. There we go. Yeah. So common. In fact, there's a quote from one of the speakers that we already heard from. I don't remember if I included it, but talking about that whole thing, like, who do you go lunch to? Who can't make friends with people, because what if I have to have a performance plan for that person next week, right? We don't want to have favoritism. The other thing is when we walk into a room, I don't know about you, but I always got called out. Here comes HR. Watch what you say. Fun police, blah, blah, blah. Like, and also sometimes you're like, I'm leaving this because this is probably going to get sticky and I don't want to be here. Right. So I'm just going to go away. Right. So that you separate yourself. And so, but in doing that, then we become lonely. Thank you, Angela, so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. Yes. So number 4, and we talked about this a little earlier, the value of the HR function, right? Understanding the value. We saw the percentage earlier from that SAGE study. And it's just shocking that the most expensive investment that most companies make, we are responsible for, and yet we don't feel valued. So if the business made an investment anywhere else, they would want someone to be in charge of keeping that investment whole and getting the ROI. And yet here we are. Yes, Heather sharing about HR being resented. I see, posts all the time, don't trust HR, those things. And that can just really get us down. One thing to ask yourself also, do our resources increase at the same rate as our responsibilities, right? Or is it considered to be manageable? Yes, you don't have the resources to do it all. One of the CPOs that I coach, she just got through a budget meeting and they slashed her budget. And she was devastated. And I said, just the answer to this is, that's great. So here are all the things you don't get. Because I'm not doing this for free. It's not like we're taking the money home. Oh, come on, Matt, you can do it.
Ourselves.
There we go.
Do we measure our sense of self and our capability based on value or based on worth? And I want to teach you guys what the difference is. Okay. So value is about our socially created sense of self. The feedback we got from our parents and our teachers and our friends and our boss and our peers and the 360 evaluation, right? All of these things that other people have told us about who we are. And we create a sense of self around that we call value. So when others are pleased with our work, we feel valuable. And when others don't like our work, we don't feel valuable, right? When others are giving us positive feedback, we feel good. And when our boss wants to come talk to us, we feel bad, like we're being called into the principal's office. And so that's social value. And that's how most people gain a sense of capability, right? Now there's another option. And that other option is an internal sense of self instead of the external sense of self. Now, I'm not saying it's one or the other. In fact, it's a healthy balance. We need a healthy balance between the feedback we're getting from outside of ourselves and the feedback we're getting inside of ourselves. But I have found I don't have to help people gain more feedback from outside of themselves. Everybody's pretty good at that. The challenge is gaining that internal sense of worth, that connection with ourselves. Okay. How do we?
So that came from an event we put on last year, January. We're doing another one here in February called HR Wellbeing Week. And what he's talking about is us defining our worth and our success by our own measure. So one of the things, for example, that I hear a lot of HR folks say is, well, I must not have done a good job making the business case. I must not be articulating the need clearly enough, right? Because I was told no. I was told I can't have the resources. I can't have the additional headcount. I can't have these things. And so if we know that we are always doing our best, right? Maybe there's something we can learn, but chances are there was a bias coming in that door too. So we have to measure our own worth against what we believe to be true, and as the knowledgeable business people that we are. Which can be difficult when you're in what's considered to be a service or a cost center organization. So number 5, the problem focus of the job. So I mentioned the comment earlier of sometimes I just want like some good news, right? And often if you're in recruiting, sometimes you get to give good news to people, but you also have to, for every one person you hire, you don't hire a large number of other people, right? So that problem focus of the job, being in a space that's negative, also comes with it a psychological weight. And so we just need to focus on that.
Because a lot of times as HR, we're dealing with a lot of stuff. Sometimes stuff that's triggers our ethical compass, that makes us feel like, you know, I know better, I could have done better, I should have done better, but I didn't. Either because I fell to or succumbed to the pressure of leadership, succumbed to whatever pressures the organization was putting on me, and I did or said something that I shouldn't have. So the F is for forgiveness. In order to move on, in order to have a good relationship with yourself means you have to have a good relationship with forgiving yourself. We talk a lot about loving ourselves, but we don't talk enough about forgiving ourselves. You can't love yourself if you don't forgive yourself. And so I think it's important to sit in the mirror or stand in the mirror. And in those moments when you've done stuff in your job that, or in your life in general, that has caused you to feel like, I should have done better, I should have known better, then when you get that moment, stand in that mirror and say to yourself, you know what, I forgive you. Because in the moment, you for whatever reason, weakness, whatever imperfection, you didn't do better, but now you know that you should do better. And so I think that F is really important.
Okay. Last but not least, the high risk and legal exposure to the decisions we make. I talked about this earlier, how we've been navigating unknown territory, generation defining experiences, and we've had to figure it out, right? What's the latest vaccine requirement? What's the latest decision on if we're coming in the office, not coming in the office? How do we handle mental health issues in the office? So these things can challenge us because there is a high level of stress. And so again, one thing I like to say is that most people's worst day is HR's every day, right? We deal with the things that people are like, I had the worst day today. This person came in and complained about something. Then I had a manager, do this. And then I had to figure out this law about this other thing. And then somebody was arguing against a policy. I mean, that's somebody's worst day. That's our Tuesday. So giving ourselves space to understand that can be stressful is important. And that being called to make judgment calls when the world is muddy, can be a challenge. All right.
The AMSO model is awareness, motivation, skill building, and opportunity to practice. And what we tend to do is just continue to create awareness. I'm going to let you know about this, and I'm going to let you know about this. And we're like, yeah, we get it. I know. But you don't get the tools. And what I love is that, some of the people who are on this call, right? Like Al and Jay and Hannah, you guys are solving some of this problem, or at least you're putting forward a solution, because I do think that there is a challenge that people don't know where to start.
All right. So we'll take Philip's direction and let's get started on what we can do to address this problem. All right. So I'm going to go through a list of things that you can do. And then I'll ask you at the end to share one that you're going to walk away from today. You've got a weekend coming up, and I want you to commit to doing one of these things for yourself. Oh my gosh, I didn't know there was going to be homework. So first one, listen to yourself. Often we put our head down, we get the work done, and we take that little voice that says, this doesn't feel right, I feel off. We don't listen to our own needs, right? And research shows if you spend 15 minutes a day just self-reflecting, you don't have to meditate, you don't have to do anything fancy, just check in, how am I doing today? How am I feeling? What am I excited about? After 10 days, you will see almost a 25% improvement in your well-being, just by checking in with yourself. So take some time and listen to yourself. If you're feeling off about something, you're not feeling right, get curious, pay attention. Be kind to yourself. Self-compassion. If we were all practicing self-compassion, we could change the world. And that's not self-care. That is speaking to ourselves like we would a close friend or loved one, right? If you're speaking to yourself in a way that you would not speak to someone else, start changing that narrative. So what I do is I think about, what would my friend say in this moment? Or what would I say to my friend if they were experiencing this? Chances are it's a lot better and a lot more balanced than how you'll talk to yourself about a situation. Now, I'm going to include mindfulness because as much as I'm terrible at meditating, the research study after research study after research study shows that being mindful and present improves our well-being, our ability to cope when we're stressed, and our ability to recover. So that doesn't have to be big and fancy. You can practice mindfulness in 30 seconds, in 15 seconds. It's just about checking in and observing the thoughts and feelings that you're experiencing in the moment. It's just doing a quick check-in. So creating that, being present, can help us cope and bounce back when we're feeling overwhelmed. Practicing acceptance. Most of this presentation has been about that, right? These things are true. Now what, right? We can't control what other people think about us, what other people think about our function, the biases people have. We cannot control that. All we can do is do our best. And so recognizing what we can and can't control is one of the best ways for us to practice resiliency and be able to bounce back and cope. If someone gets angry at something we say, we don't have to own that anger. That's their anger. So learning to understand what we can and can't control, accepting what we can't control, it can be a great way to help you navigate difficult challenges. Sticking to your values. This is another one. Use your values as a touchstone. If I have to make a decision and it's a difficult one, well, what am I solving for? What is my goal? What's most important at the end of the day? What's the thing that I stand for? I mentioned earlier, I had an experience where the executive team and I did not see things the same way from a diversity, equity, inclusion point of view. And I made the decision that if I get fired because of the things I believe in, I'm okay with that, because that's part of my value. I would not be okay with being something else. And so sticking to your values is important. If you aren't sure what's most important to you, there's a ton of lists of values out there. At least once a year, check in. How are you doing on taking care of what's most important to you? Not what other people need, not what other people think, to you. That also helps you build that self-worth that Matt was talking about earlier. Be patient with yourself. Perfectionism runs rampant in HR. So be patient with yourself. You're going to make mistakes. Some days you're not going to stand up for what you believe in and you're going to regret it. Some days you're going to say, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. Be patient with yourself. Know that small steps are the best way to progress. And we've had years of training that this is just the work, and we shouldn't feel the way we feel. Feel your feelings.
As we start the day, we have a full enlarged balloon. As we go about our work day, as we face challenges and tasks, and even just the transactional parts of our role, we expire air from our balloon and it gets smaller and smaller, and that's normal. That's exactly how it should be. However, we end our work shift and go home with a much smaller balloon, which is fine as long as we have strategies and a regime to refill that balloon of mental health so we can start the next day with a suitably bolstered balloon. Otherwise, if we go to the next day without any consistent means of refilling our balloon, we become much more vulnerable. The psychological term is labile to difficulties and stressors. And so we might respond with emotional activation to a stressor that we would previously have just taken in our stride out.
So Christopher is a psychologist in Melbourne. In Australia, they have a national requirement for psychological health and safety at work. And so he works with sports teams and major construction projects to ensure that they have the ability to refill their balloon. I mentioned perfectionism. Expect you're going to make mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. Be patient with yourself when you do. You are not a failure because you made one mistake. Okay, I've mentioned psychological safety a couple times. If you're not familiar with the concept, it's really about creating a space where you can be authentic, where you can make mistakes, you can ask questions, and you can question, you can explore ideas and be curious. I have a whole other program on creating psychological safety. This is something that the World Health Organization just recently produced their guidelines on mental health at work, which I highly recommend taking a look at. If you're interested, just let me know. I can send a link. And it talks about creating that foundation of psychological safety. Here's one that many of us skip. Take care of the basics. Get up and walk around. Eat something. Drink a glass of water. When we go back to back to back, especially for those of us who are HR business partners who have to be on call at all times, and we're taking things, late at night or on the weekend, or we're dealing with crises, take some time to take care of yourself. Block the time on your calendar. Block lunch. And do what you're doing here. Connect with others. Connecting with others is a form of self-compassion. And when we practice self-compassion, it activates the nurturing and what's called pro-social parts of our brains. In other words, it makes us better people to be around. So investing in yourself and self-compassion is not selfish. It actually makes you a better human for others. So connect with others, share your experiences, support each other. Hey, I'm having a rough day. How do you handle this? So there are some resources out there. I mentioned several. Again, feel free to reach out to me if you'd like links. We founded Kite HR earlier this year. It has daily micro-learning. There's the HR Wellbeing group on LinkedIn. My friend Ben Eubanks has a summer camp. You can also organize an offsite for the whole HR team to learn some of these skills, to even go deeper on some of these skills, and to be able to weave this into how you work as an HR team. Again, being aware of the risks that exist for us within our function. So getting trained on that is a great way to also build those skills. And then a lot of folks have come out of COVID as HR for HR coaches, right? So as I mentioned, I coach people. I have a couple of friends who coach people. So find someone that you can maybe use as a support. I'm going to skip this one. Sorry, Kim. And then feel free to connect with me if you'd like. I'm on LinkedIn and on TikTok mostly. And I post as your HR big sister on TikTok. But with that, I know we only have 5 more minutes, and I just want to open up if there's any questions or comments. While we're waiting, please put in the chat which of those activities, just pick one, are you going to do this weekend to help take care of you? Which one was the first one, PJ? I can't remember now.
Listening to yourself. Yeah, listen to yourself.
That was it. The other one, I love this quote from Schitt's Creek. If you ever watched that show, where they talk about taking a selfish. Take a selfish. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm so glad. Yes, water, exercise. I got myself a little under the desk stair stepper thing. And every once in a while I'll get on it and like do a little exercise. This is great. Thank you so much. Okay, well, you take care of yourselves. We have a lot on our plates. There's a lot of headwinds, but all of us are doing the important work that makes a difference in people's lives. So take care of you, because you can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Al. It's amazing what we have gone through in the past few years, and it is absolutely amazing all that we've accomplished. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Al said, you guys have done just an amazing job, and you do have to take care of yourselves, because you can't do anything if you're not able to do that. Always know that HR Roundtable is certainly an opportunity for you to be able to share and talk about things just as we've done today. And I'm so glad that you guys had an opportunity to do that in a safe space. Hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Thanks so much and have a wonderful weekend. Bye, everybody.